All right, what's up, folks? Welcome to Taking Stock with Geoff and Mikey, episode 4. And in this episode, we are going to be talking about the thing that coronavirus took away from us, which is in-person esports communities. And we kind of have a perspective on this, being people who have run in-person events for the bulk of our experience in esports, and now having spent the past few months running online events. So in-person esports is definitely something that I value a whole lot. I think it is a great experience that anyone who can take part in and is interested in taking part in should. So I think it's a huge part of what makes esports special.
And it's a big loss, definitely,
Yeah.
that we haven't been able to have those kinds of events. Whatever it is your local TOs are doing, first of all, please go out and support them.
Right. Absolutely.
So, do you want to talk about the abstract first, or do you want to talk about the concrete stuff? Like, do you want to talk about what effect this has had on us and our job descriptions? Do you want to talk about
I guess we'll talk about just the concrete first, just to kind of
okay.
lay the groundwork. No pun intended.
So to start with, I currently am working for Bravis. I used to also be working for an organization called SAK Gaming down in Arizona. They're the biggest Smash TOs that Arizona has ever had. They're a pretty professional organization. They, as opposed to just being, say, a YouTube channel or a TO or something, they had their own venue that they paid for. We'll talk about that a little bit later and what became of that. But they were doing basically every step of the process, from getting the events set up, booking the venue, to creating the production quality on stream, to putting all those VODs up on YouTube, to getting all the people out there. They would pay to fly people out to tournaments. They were running some pretty large regional events, 300 plus entrants in a single singles bracket. So they were doing an awful lot. And so I've transitioned a little bit in that I'm not working for them as much anymore. I'm working full-time for Bravis. That's part of that. But another unfortunate bit is that there's not as much work for them to do right now. They're in the position where it's no longer viable for them to be doing upkeep on the physical venue. And that's one of the things that's... I look at people saying, "Oh, this is great. Now work at home is going to be way more normalized." And I'm like, okay, yeah, work from home in office jobs, that's fantastic. And I really do support that. But there are some positions, some jobs that were better done in person. And I do think this is one of them. We can get to talking about why a little bit later. We also used to run leagues for Bravis with the Boys and Girls Clubs, with in person with kids. We're still working with them, but obviously we're not going to go into a whole room full of children. That's even under normal circumstances, that's a germ factory. But in this condition, that's just not going to happen. So we used to run a lot of in-person leagues that involved us carrying physical equipment from one place to another to get those all running. And all of those have dried up. Everything is now using the online functionality of whatever game it is that we're playing on the given day. So our focus has shifted largely from physical operations, from truck rentals, from, getting the right equipment in the right person's car, to content creation and software, and figuring out how to emulate the experience of an in-person event without actually having the in-person part of it. Is there anything else you think we can address there?
I think anything else probably starts to go into the abstract. So if we want to start talking about that, then we can start talking about that.
Gotcha. So that's the position we now find ourselves in. Now, I guess the first question, since we're talking about community, is what effect do you think this has had on the players?
I think in large part it depends on the game, right? I think that, for most esports, actually, this is like not very far from the norm. Now, we come from the Smash Bros. Community where for a long time, up until now, basically, online events were seen as sort of a novelty, sort of invalid for the purposes of determining anything meaningful competitively. And part of that is because I think of how easy it is to run in-person tournaments for it. If you're looking at running in-person tournaments for, any game that runs on a computer, essentially, you're looking at like linking those computers together via some sort of LAN setup, connecting to the internet in some way. The logistics of hosting in-person events for those sorts of games is much more difficult than the logistics of hosting them for Smash, where you have one console that two players plug into and they go, right?
I think one other thing to add to that list that makes it even more difficult is that Smash is typically not a team game. You may have doubles, but that's the most people that you will need to put 4 on one setup.
Yeah.
If you're talking about a League of Legends tournament or an Overwatch tournament, just running one match of that requires you to have 10 setups or 12 setups.
Yeah.
And all of those are going to be high-end PCs. And so, the financial investment there is bonkers.
The next thing that we talk about on this podcast is going to be our sort of Franken esports game, where we combine a whole bunch of aspects from other esports titles to make what we consider our perfect esports game. And I think one of the considerations there has to be how your players view the game, I guess, like in a literal sense, right? So there are games like Smash where you and everyone else who is playing the game at that time can be looking at the same screen, the same visual elements, and it all makes sense to them. I think there are very few games that are like that. Very few.
Anything first person or anything limited third person, you just don't get to see the whole map at once.
Yeah. And so, like, also because of the limitations in terms of the hardware that we're working with for most consoles, even if you do run a team game, the most you're going to be able to run on that console is usually 4, unless you're playing on the Switch. Most games will not support any more than 4 players. So it is definitely complicated to run in-person events. I think that there are ways that are worth looking at for you to be able to do those things for games that are even more complicated, and it certainly has been done. Obviously there are LAN events for pretty much every esport. It's just that some of them are more pervasive because I think of the accessibility than others.
You'll certainly see LANs. It's more a question, I think, to gauge, how good the game is in that context. Do you have locals? Do you have local LANs?
Yeah.
If you're like local area with the more limited resources than a big TOing group are still able to put those things together, that's when you know that the game is really working on that level.
Right. So that's the aspect of it that has to do with the game itself, I suppose. But in terms of, I think, the value of having in-person tournaments, regardless of what game you're talking about, I think we have probably a lot to say about that.
So, first of all, I was talking about, the impact on the players. Playing online has a really bizarre psychological effect on everybody
Yeah.
involved. It's depersonalizing, it's anonymizing. It makes it so that even though you are doing the exact same thing that the person on the other side of the screen is doing, you don't see them as a human being. Um, you're not seeing the whites of their eyes. You're not seeing the body language, the personal cues you're used to being able to see when you interact with humans.
Mm-hmm.
If you interact with humans, I don't know. Some of y'all are some gamers out there, but uh, if you can't see those social cues, then the other person is manifest as a player as a character in a video game, basically.
Yeah.
And if that player in the video game, that character, doesn't do the things that you want them to do, it's very easy to get upset at that player in the video game. It's easy to blame that character in a video game
Yeah.
for not making the choices that you would make. And that has a lot of different effects. The first thing we're probably thinking of is online toxicity, where players blame each other and refuse to accept responsibility, and it's this whole ugly cycle that happens. I think that it's hard in those situations, in part because someone who's playing a video game, they're probably doing that after work or after school or something. They're probably doing that in a position where they're trying to do this to relax, but it's not a relaxing activity. It's a competitive
Yeah.
activity. It's an activity that requires introspection to really get good at. And if you are not willing to do that hard psychological inner work at this very moment in time, well, then you externalize. Instead of blaming yourself, you blame others, and those others happen to come packaged in a not human looking form, and so it's really easy to just treat them as a part of the video game, to curse at them like you would curse at a glitch that you saw happening in a single player game that got you killed when you didn't think you should have been.
Right.
um,
And I
so
think that's a problem in terms of the on ramps for games whose uh, multiplayer experience primarily looks like that when you're playing competitively. I think that especially in team games, that creates for an environment where you need teammates to be able to play effectively, and you're not really putting yourself in a position to be able to like make those connections with people.
mhm.
So in one way, you can kind of simulate that in online tournaments, and we do that by making like discords for people to be able to interact with each other in a slightly more social way than they can in whatever the game offers. Um, but I think there's still a piece missing when you take that from even that format to in-person events.
Mhm.
In-person events, I think, have a culture that understands that you need other people to be able to, even in an individual game, you need other people to get you to where you want to go. And so, most of the time that I would guess most people spend at an in person esports event is not spent competing, but actually spent playing friendlies, playing casual matches with other people. And that's certainly true for Smash. I think it might not necessarily be true for other games just because of hardware limitations. But usually when you go to a Smash tournament, there are enough setups available that you are there and spending a lot of your time playing outside of the competitive structure of the tournament itself, which I think is a hugely important experience. Like that is the reason why people go to those things, essentially. Like you don't pay the money to go to a Smash Major with the expectation that you're going to get money back, even if you're like a top player. You know, because like on any given day you could just kind of lose it and get 17th or something and end up out of the money. You know.
And even if you're getting 7th, that's not going to pay for the flight all the time.
Yeah. it is definitely a culture of people that are attending these things specifically because of the uh, in-game experience, but also the social experience that they offer. Um, and people pay a lot of money for that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not cheap, you know, to pay for housing and flights and food and venue fee and entry fee. Um, but that is, I think, for me anyway, like super worth it. That experience, I think, is incredibly valuable and incredibly positive.
Yeah, I always said that whenever would travel out of state while I was very active in the Melee community, that I would learn more from going to a regional out of state than I would learn from 2 months of playing normally.
Yeah,
I think that there are a lot of positive factors that don't involve just the core getting better at the game, but I think that one of the biggest reasons that all of those factors exist is that you really do get much better at the game by going someplace else and being exposed to other players and the way that they will approach the game than staying within your own circle of friends. Um, it's such a common theme that you see in the Smash community where someone will play with a whole bunch of friends casually. They'll have a group of 7 or 8 guys who will, rotate around whenever they're able. They'll come over to each other's house and play the game and trash talk each other, have some beers, have a good time, and or some Capri Suns because we were once small.
yes,
And we did not change our behavior in the slightest once we got older. Um, and then the biggest fish in that pond, the player who's beating everybody else and it's not even close, they decide, hey, I heard that there are tournaments for this, guys. Let's bring a couple of us out to, and you won't get all of the players. Some of them are just there for the social experience, some of them aren't that interested in getting better at it, but you'll get maybe 1 or 2 of those guys, and they'll all come out to a tournament and they'll be pumped and they'll be ready and they'll be they'll have some fighting words, and they don't know anybody, so they're being a little bit cautious, but they're like, oh, I
yeah,
think I'm pretty good. And then round 1, they get dunked on, absolutely destroyed. Round 2, it's a little bit closer, but they still lose by a significant margin and they're out. And they realize, okay, small fish, big pond, small fish, big pond. That small fish, big pond experience would not exist if it were just the isolated in-person community. It has to be the bigger in-person community.
yeah.
There have to be multiple in-person communities in order to really get that sort of experience going. Now, online, you probably do kind of get that experience, except that online matchmaking is going to cushion the blow a little bit for you. The game more often than not is going to determine, oh, this is a new player, this is a lower level player based on their results. We're going to pair them with other lower level players. In a game design perspective, I think that's a good thing. But from an esports perspective, from a competitive perspective, I want to know exactly how bad I am at the game.
Yeah, right.
I want to know what my problems are right away. It might be a little bit of a shock, a little bit of a blow to your ego at first, especially since this is your first opportunity to dip your toe into the community, and this is where you get bodied. But knowing where you stand makes it so that you know where you're going. And I think that that's really important for anyone who's serious about the game. It's important for you to put yourself in positions where you will fail more often, because you're more likely to lose from those positions. You're more likely to have something you need to learn, have something you're forced to learn.
Yeah.
I remember playing with Ty, who is a top 100 player all the time. And I've never really beaten him in a legitimate set. He's still much, much better than me. And I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, probably ever. But the thing is, playing with him over and over again made it so that there were certain things he tried to do that I learned how to beat. I recover way, way better when I'm knocked off stage because he went off for the craziest, stupidest edge guards he could think of.
Right.
Um, and because I was constantly forced by a very good player to respond to those, my recovery is just better than a lot of players were at my level. Because I was able to get that experience from someone who's going to break my habits down.
Yeah. I think about this a lot when I play Rocket League and I see someone in like gold be toxic to their teammate as if like they're they're like the messiah of Rocket League or something, and they're just like, I can't play with these noobs, dude. I can't stoop to this level. And like gold is so far removed from being even close to what I would think is like the standard level of a competitive melee player, like where I am in melee. I think like gold in Rocket League is so far like beneath that in terms of like your competency technically, your game knowledge, but like the matchmaking makes it so that that is what matters in the moment. And you know, even though you're at this level that is like not close to being competitive, it's like you don't have that humbling experience really. And it's frustrating to me because like I'll play with Brandon and he's, you know, he's champ 3 or whatever, and when you matchmake with a gold player and a champ 3 player, it's like, oh, we're putting you up with the champ 3s. So we play and obviously we get destroyed, and Brandon's like, this isn't fun, and I'm like, I think it's fun. I want that. I want to get thrown into the fire, you know, because I want to like see, and I know that there are like vast technical differences, and a lot of that accounts for like where I am not doing well, but I think there's still something to be said for having that experience and for getting thrown into the fire and getting your and getting, you know, kicked around a little bit, getting your comeuppance.
I remember back in high school, I was in a very competitive music program. Like the school that I was at has won Grammy Awards for their music program.
Dang.
It was a very good one. And I remember the very last year I was there, I ended up making the top band. And I mean, granted, like part of this is the good player graduated sort of thing, you
Sure.
know? Like I definitely went in humbly, but I remember going into that thinking, I might be the very worst player in this entire band, you know? Every one of these people are brilliant, but I'm way happier being the worst player in a very, very good group. Because first of all, I get to listen to some really beautiful music. And second of all, the act of participating in music, I think, is really important, which obviously there's no way to, I guess there's like spectating versus playing in a game, but I think even if you're getting bodied in a game, you still get to be there and participate in something cool. Like you're still, you can look at what just happened to you, what that top player just did, and appreciate, oh my god, that was so good.
Yeah.
In a way that it can be really hard to see if you're just spectating sometimes. But that's not really the point. The point here is that I learned then about myself that I would much rather be in a position where I'm the worst player in the room than the best player in the room. Because the worst player in the room has a lot to learn from everybody else around them, and they can be guided towards progress. I think it really is the progress more than it is the finish line of actually being the best or something that is such a motivation for so many people. And you just get more opportunities to that when you're not all alone at the top. When you actually do have people who are able to just run circles around you.
Right.
Now that's a mindset that I don't think everybody has. But I think it is a mindset that people develop the more competitive they get at something, the better they get at something. I think that unless you are just innately like the best and you don't really feel like you're putting in, obviously you have to put an effort to be the best. But unless you feel like you don't have to put in effort, that's just what you would naturally do to be the best, which is true for a very, very small number of people. I feel like just about everybody is going to focus on everything from an improvement first mindset.
Right.
And, being put into a place where you're worse than someone is the ideal place for that person to be.
Yeah. And I think that an in-person event is more likely to put you in that mindset because, like, it's kind of a circle, right? Like, you've reached this point where you find yourself invested enough to actually take the effort to leave your house, which you don't have to do when you play online, right? So you figure,
Mm-hmm.
well, I'm out of my house, so I might as well make the most of this experience while I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
Which, you come to find that experience is one that is worth having because you are seeing progress and you are being shown like what is possible in a very like hard to ignore way, and so you come back or you don't. But I think most of the time people want to come back.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
It is polarizing. I think that there are a lot of people who, for one reason or other, show up to an in-person event and decide it's not for them very quickly.
yeah,
And there are still people who love the game. This was something that it was really hard for me to struggle with when I was a TO of my own event. The very first one that I ever ran, there were so many people who would tell me, "Oh, I love that game," and they would just not show up to an event. They would not want to go. They wouldn't want to give it a try, and it's so difficult for me. Why would you love the game this much? I've played it since I was a kid. Thought I was really good at it. Why would you have that feeling and not want to go to a tournament where other people share that? Um, but there are a lot of factors that play into it. Aside from what we talked about last week, the toxicity of a community may have, or issues they may have with their people. Um, it, it there are a lot of different levels of commitment to it, and it's only the higher levels that are really going to lock into that mindset and
yeah,
go for it. But having that group of players there who really are passionate about it, that is a huge thing. Even if the player isn't going to go, like they think it is cool that somebody else is willing to go out and do that, and that kind of gives them more of a drive to play the game.
yeah. It's interesting. I'm gonna smash meme here, but it kind of reminds me of the inner game of tennis. And in the inner game of tennis, they talk about how if you do something bad, the incorrect response to that is to place a value judgment on you as a person because you did that thing. So, for example, like, I miss this L cancel and that makes me terrible at Melee, right? I think a lot of times people who are in that position of like, this is interesting, but I don't want to go, have maybe never really been in that position before where they've had to like fail at something, or they have and it like they didn't like how it felt. Right? they
Mm-hmm.
they they don't want to be in a position where they perform poorly and then assign a value judgment to themselves based off of that poor performance, when
Mm-hmm.
in reality, like, if you're learning to walk when you're a baby, do you allow yourself to chastise yourself for not being able to walk well? No. And nobody chastises you for that either. Nobody expects you to walk well. You've never walked before. Walking is pretty difficult, pretty complicated if you're a baby, and you're going to fall a lot. But once you develop that complex of like, okay, I can't fail because failing will make me look incompetent. If I fail, it reflects negatively on me as a person. that's when you fall into this trap of not trying things because you are afraid of what happens when you give effort to something and it doesn't go well.
Yeah.
So what I can tell you as someone who's seen it all is that I don't care how bad you are. You should come anyway.
Mm-hmm.
No one is going to be
Like,
a more harsh critic than you are to yourself.
I've handed my grandmother a GameCube controller, buddy. If you can do better than her, you're fine in my book.
Yeah, absolutely. Like,
So,
the time is now. Well, not now. The time is whenever we come back. Enter an online tournament if you can, but I'm saying that you should go to an in-person. There is no being ready for it. You should go when you have the thought of, oh, this might be fun. You know? And when you have the $5 to spend on venue fee. Or go to something that's free. There's a lot of free options out there.
mm-hmm. Yeah. I also think that one of the things that helps a lot in getting from that beginner point to a higher level of play is finding someone who is higher level that you can latch on to. And that's another, I think, failure of skill-based matchmaking, that you're only ever going to end up playing against people who are near your level, which we've talked about, why that's going to decrease the amount of growth you experience. But a big part of, how I was able to get that practice with higher level players isn't just that they were there in the room. It's also that I became friends with them. Like, I bribed Ty with food. I took him into the dining hall and used my free passes when I was in college so that he could eat too. And then in exchange, he gave me an hour and a half. That friendship with him opened the door to a lot of other experiences I wouldn't have otherwise had. Because I was with him, I also got to meet X, Y, and Z player in my local community. I also got to go, travel with him and end up in these hotel rooms with really, really good players. And I got to know them as well. It's really, really cool to meet your favorite player. It's a whole other deal to be introduced to your favorite player and for them to acknowledge you as a peer, as someone in the social circle.
Yeah. And I think to some people it might be frustrating to be that sort of mentor in that relationship. But to that I say, join our Discord server because we literally cannot tell you no. It's our job to help you, kind of. So, like, I think one thing that maybe can be a deterrent to people is that it's not just hard to, like, be good at the game. It's also hard in some cases to ask good questions. Like, it's possible to ask stupid questions about Smash, like, to be too vague, to ask, like, well, how can I wave dash better? It's like, well, the answer to that question is that you need to practice. There is nothing that I can tell you that will replace you grinding that. And it's okay to ask those questions. It might be frustrating to some people to answer them, but it's good to ask them so that you can then learn how to ask better questions.
Mm-hmm. And quick aside on that, it is important to remember that a lot of these higher level players, people that are known and are looked up to, they're going to get the same questions from a lot of different people. It's a phenomenon that, like, people often think they are the first person to ever ask this question, or they don't consider that others have asked the question. It's like, that one time that you broke your arm in elementary school, when you went into the school that day, every single person saw you with a cast where they didn't see you with a cast the day before. And they all asked what happened. Hundreds of them. think of that experience. Think of the frustration involved after hearing that same freaking question the 100th time, literally.
Yeah.
Like, it's kind of irrational to be that upset because it's a very reasonable thing to ask. You'd probably be asking it of someone else if they showed up with a cast. But having to answer the same thing so many times in a row, it tires you out. It's one of those things that, this is applicable in a lot of different situations. We could have talked about this last week where, the people who have dealt with injustices, having to explain the same thing over and over again to people who don't get it. They experience the same kind of frustration, but it's even worse for them in that, it's something that is actually harmful that they have to keep explaining, and they feel obligated to explain it, but they're also exhausted by explaining it. So there's a lot to be said about that particular phenomenon. But in this instance, just be thinking about any top player you're asking a question to. Make sure that they are in a good headspace to be helping you. Make sure that you're not exhausting their mental reserves. But if you can establish, a healthy relationship like that, where they are invested in your progress, and you're able to at least be a friend for them, if nothing else, maybe not the best training partner that they've got because they're so far beyond, but at least, make sure that there's some give and take there so that they don't feel like you're buying their attention, but that, you're being there for them and you're not taking them for granted. That kind of relationship is really positive and got me a pretty far ways into the community, I think, by itself.
And I think one thing that you can do is just ask if you can ask things. There's no harm in saying, like, in playing friendlies with somebody and being like, hey, do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions? And, like, give them the opportunity to either say, like, yeah, sure thing, or, I just kind of want to focus on playing right now. And then also the other way around, because sometimes what I'll see is somebody they'll, like, beat someone and then give them unsolicited advice afterwards. So on the flip side, say, like, hey, do you want some advice? I don't see any harm in just, making sure that it's okay, because sometimes somebody won't want to do something like that. They won't want to hear it right after they've lost, or they're like focusing on playing too much necessarily to critique you.
Yeah, that was something that I remember a lot of us learning the hard way at the ASU weeklies that we ran, that not everybody wants that advice. And I think it's definitely important, if you're interested in committing competitively. Let's try to combine those words. If you're committing competitively to the game, I think it is very important to hear any advice that someone might have for you, whether or not you trust their advice. More input is never bad. You can just choose to reject input if you want, but there are some people who will, have this emotional response of, wow, I thought I was even with this guy. I thought I was better than him, but here he is advising me like he's better than me. They get that kind of tension, and they're going to have a really negative emotional response to it. And maybe they even recognize that that's irrational, but in the moment, they're in an emotionally compromised state. So that's something to be aware of, that unsolicited advice can sometimes be as bad as refusing to give advice at all.
Right.
But anyway, going back away from that, that whole social dynamic doesn't exist online, of course. You don't really, in any situation I have seen, see people advising their opponents after they win in an online match. I've seen, like, some words of encouragement in like the less toxic league lobbies that I've been a part of. There are some genuinely good people out there who are, looking and saying, yeah, that champion, I can tell you're just picking them up right now. Don't worry about it. Like, this matchup was hard for you. Go get him, champ. That kind of idea. But even when you've got like a text chat specifically for the end of the match, and you've got nothing but time to sit and talk with those people, most of them are probably going to drop out after a few seconds, and they're going to just start a new game.
Right.
There's no circumstance under which they just stick around and talk for 10 minutes about what happened in that game. They're going to go on to another one.
Yeah, and I mean, even when we set up Discord servers for a lot of our tournaments, like, I think that does help a little bit. It does encourage people to communicate with each other, but, you know, like, most of the times people aren't going to be in the voice channels. People aren't necessarily going to be talking about, like, what X character does in Y matchup or anything.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely a different environment than what you would see at an in-person tournament. And I think in some ways that aspect just cannot be there for online competition, which is unfortunate. We're trying our best, but
Mm-hmm.
I think part of it is just, you know, it's just irreplaceable.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I'm looking at it right now and thinking, why doesn't that exist in an online space? Because, you know, all the resources, you could send people online, you could video chat people, you
Yeah.
know, you can have conversations online. But we have conversations about different things when we're in person than when we're online. Maybe part of it has to do with the venue and that it's a lot easier to it's a lot more informal. Even it's a lot less intentional
Mm-hmm.
to end up in vicinity of someone so that you can have conversation. Like if you're having a conversation like we're having right now on Discord, you have to specifically choose who you're having that conversation with, and you have to set things up with a few clicks with that person
Yeah.
individually. um, so I mean, online we've seen, for example, with someone like Cyrox, in the melee community, how powerful it can be to sit in an online space and talk through your thoughts on the game. You know, he rose to top 100 status without actually playing that much. And by that I mean he was still practicing like a crazy person, but more of his time was spent analyzing and talking than it was actually playing the game on his stream.
Yeah.
So, of course, there had to be some technical practice going into that, and he had to attend some tournaments. But um, there's a lot of ground that you can make. There's something to be said for using an online space and grinding out on net play and trying to learn that way. But when you're in an in-person event, you become part of conversations you didn't intend to become a part of. You just happen to be close enough physically to these people who are having a conversation, find a way in and be like, "Oh, hey, you're asking about that combo percent? That's this one. Um, you need to get them up to here for that to be able to hit. That's my experience." And now all of a sudden you're a part of that exchange and information's coming at you really fast.
Yeah.
So I think that maybe it's that there's an ease with which you can enter and exit and merge conversations that online can't emulate
Yeah.
because it has to be directed. It has to know which two ends of the country to send the information to. So maybe that's a part of it. Obviously, you know, we have, as social animals, we have the physical thing we talked about before, seeing the whites of
Yeah.
their eyes, seeing their body language. That really facilitates communication well. um but thinking about it, like the online spaces that we have are so close to simulating the IRL ones. It
Man,
is actually kind of interesting to me now that I'm thinking about it this much.
maybe it's the uncanny valley of human communication, dude. Maybe it's too close.
Yeah, maybe we need to go back to AOL Messenger. I don't know.
Maybe.
ROTFLOLBBQ.
Yes. Maybe we need to go back to Smashboards is the real thing.
Oh my god, Smashboard.
Forums.
See, Smashboards, for all of its, you know, for how obsolete that website
Yeah.
is, in so many regards, the community hub of the Smash community was 100% there more than anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Like that community was thriving. It's it's so crappy to go through and have like 400 pages of 25 forum posts to have to read through to catch up to a conversation.
Yeah.
But like, people did it. It was worth it to so many people. Um, I think it was also phenomenal in that it established regional rivalries, because since the internet was this anonymous place where you couldn't see anybody's faces, recording your gameplay was nowhere near as easy as it is
Yeah.
now and required like VHS tapes and crap.
You have to
You
put it on
couldn't send those files
DC++.
online.
Yeah. There's
Right.
no
Like
YouTube.
there was no good way to share any of that stuff. You didn't know how good the other guy was.
Yeah.
You had tournament results that they could submit online, but all of those tournament results are relative to players you've also never played before. And so at this point, like, you get these really cool rivalries popping up. You get the East Coast trash talking the West Coast. You get conversations, who's the best in the Midwest? And the only people who knew were the people who were capable of traveling all that distance.
Yeah.
Which happens so rarely, and that made it so cool in in-person events. Now we know all of those things, and that's actually sort of a negative thing. As bizarre as it is that, you know, so many more people are connected, I'm sure from a spectator's perspective at least, it's a lot less interesting now, because all of the top players know each other. Like, from Sweden, from America, doesn't matter. Like, they know everybody who's walking into that room. They know their rank. They know what character they play. They know their rough play style. At a top level, everybody's just friends at this point. They've had to learn to live with each other at the very least.
Yeah.
So maybe that anonymizing factor did help in some ways. Is it ever possible to emulate that again? I don't know. Probably not. I think there are too many benefits to the way things are now that outweigh that factor that's lost. But it is something that you'll always hear old school players complaining about too. You know, that might have been a major draw for someone to join the community at one point in time, that there was definitely a community. There were shared group norms. There were things that everybody knew about the game and things that everyone could talk about, even if you met a stranger who played it.
Yeah.
But there was also an element of mystery in that you could go to a new region and have no bloody idea what you were walking yourself into.
Right. Like, I think the positives undoubtedly outweigh the negatives of that. Like, when Pound 3 happened, that was like the first tournament that Mango had traveled to, and he might have been the best player in the world at that time, you know? But to that point, it was just not really a thing that was readily available for people. Like, there were not as many opportunities to do that. And now I think, well, not now, again, specifically, but from like 2015, 2013, even up until this year, you know, there have been a ton of, like, people who have gotten picked up by major esports teams in Melee, in a 15-plus-year-old game, because of the prevalence of so many tournaments that have popped up, because of Reddit, and because of YouTube, and because of all these new media platforms where people can share things more easily than on Smashboards.
Mm-hmm. And the marketing aspect of it is also, I think, very important to note there, that now that things are more public, more widely known, that brings in more people.
Yeah.
And that allows us to have more and bigger majors than we used to have.
Yeah.
Like, in the time period we're talking about, the largest tournament in the world had 300 people. And that was the big one. That was the one that you didn't want to miss, you know? 300 people. We've run regionals bigger than that in Arizona at this point.
Right, yeah. People came from, like, Europe to Smash Camp, you know?
Yeah.
They just do that now. I think another point is that in these online heavy communities, like, there are LAN centers that you can go to that might exist in your town, but, like, probably not. And then there are LCS LANs in, like, arenas, and, like, the only thing in between is, like, DreamHack, you know? There's not a whole lot in that gooey middle space. that would look like a local or regional tournament in Smash. And I think that if you think about like the hypest Smash tournaments, they were not like in the arena at Evo. And they also probably weren't at your local venue. They were in like a hotel ballroom in Dearborn, Michigan. You know? Or like even the theater at Genesis, I think, falls into that middle space. And I think there's sort of like this intangible hype that is kind of lost when you're at an online event. And even in some cases when you're in an arena. As weird as that sounds. Like, we've seen arena... Like, Game Tyrant Expo, for example. There was no reason that Game Tyrant Expo in 2017 had to be at that arena. You know? But I think that shooting for that is, like, a pretty goal to have. It's neat to think about. It's just that, like, the gooey middle center is so, like... It's so delicious. It's so... It's like a Tootsie Pop, you know? It's... it's amazing.
Yeah, there's a momentum that gets built when you've traveled to someplace, and at first it's just you and the people in your carpool. And then you get to the hotel and you're like, oh, we made it. We are here now, physically.
Yeah.
And then, let's say, you know, the best experience for this, I think, was when Evo had its venue in the same location as the rooms that you would stay in.
Yeah.
Genesis actually did this most recently, where the hotel that you're staying in, the ballroom downstairs, is your venue. So
it's
you
so
know
sick.
you can literally walk out your door, go down an elevator, and be at the venue. When that happens, you get there and you're like, oh, we're here at Genesis. And you walk through the lobby and you see, holy crap, that's that player. It just standing there, talking, being a human being. They're shorter than I thought they would be. Wow. and you get this visceral connection where everything that you've seen online, all of a sudden, boom, it's right there. It's in person. And that distinction is a little bit shocking, a little bit strange. You have some... You're like, oh, wow, I didn't think their personality was going to be like that at all. I didn't know their voice was that high. What the heck? But you start to have these experiences and you start to make these connections where it feels like you're learning more, I think, about the community than you knew before, even though you were still a part of the community then.
Yeah.
You make all those little connections, and then maybe you go down and you play some friendlies, and you meet some guy from California that you know would never have possibly met before. And you're like, oh, hey, this is really fun. We're having a great back and forth here. And then they introduce you to their buddies, and you go out and get food later. Or you run into a top player, and you get a chance to ask them for some advice and get to know them. And like, I think that something about the GUI middle center you're talking about is also the accessibility of top-level play.
Yeah.
Because it's not just that there's... Okay, just making sure the right cat is eating that food. It's not just that there's mid-level play there that is at the appropriate level for you. It's also that the lower and middle level players have access to the high level players. If you go to an NBA game, there is zero chance you're gonna get to like sit and share a beer with LeBron James.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to sit down and chat with those people. If you go to a Smash tournament, you could totally buy Mango a beer.
Yeah.
That's a thing that would probably happen, like, if you were really inclined to do it.
That's the incredible part of esports, I think. And that's why, like, Smash in particular is, like, one of the things that I enjoy about the fighting game community the most is that it, you know, it's going to pop up on my list of Franken Esports attributes as, like, the most accessible way to play in person. Like, there is one basketball court at Talking Stick Resort Arena where my favorite sports team plays. There are, like, 200 of them at Genesis 7. It's incredible. And all you have to do is bring this thing over and plug it into it, and it's like exponentially more accessible than like anything that you can do that means as much competitively. You know?
Like, imagine being able to invite Roger Federer over to a court and just play a couple of rounds before he moves on to the next one.
Yeah.
Like, that's just not an experience that you ever have with a physical sport because of the massive space requirement.
Yeah. And it could be this way for a lot more esports than it is, I think. And it's a little bit more difficult, but I think that the blueprint is there. I think that there are going to be more esports that could have this blueprint also.
Yeah, this Franken game one that we're going to talk about is going to be complicated because I think that's another aspect of the solo play versus team play question that complicates things.
Yeah, because
like, I think we're going to spend a good amount of time just debating, like, should this game be a team game? I think there are good arguments for both.
Yeah. Yep.
But let's talk about the team context for a second as well.
Well, we do actually have to go, I think.
Okay.
We have, yeah. I have a stop at 11 anyway, so.
I see.
It's
all right.
Yeah.
Well, we'll be back at 1 p.m. for Bronze Leading the Blind.
Nice.
So come on and hang out with us as we teach some people how to play League of Legends for in some cases, the first time. And in some cases, pretty close to the first time. So that's going to be a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to that. We've got a lot of stuff planned for that one. And we'll see you on the next podcast. We do this same time today's Thursday.
Yeah, Thursday.
Starting at 10 Pacific, 1 Eastern. So thanks for listening, everybody. I'm Coach Geoff.
Coach Mikey. See you later.
Bye-bye.